to try and get to the bottom of what it means, particularly in a Zimbabwean context. We're now joined by Judge Chris Greenland, who you may have seen reporting on the Oscar trial earlier in a while ago, but also we've had him in studios to talk about Zimbabwean situations. Always a pleasure to have you, Judge, and I just wonder if you first of all can start by explaining what an impeachment process means, particularly from a Zimbabwean context.
Good afternoon, Peter, and good afternoon to all the viewers. I don't know if you can hear me.
Hello, Judge. I was just saying if you could just tell it. Yes, can you hear me now?
Yes, yeah. I certainly can.
All right. Yeah, just explain to us the impeachment process from a Zimbabwean context. What needs to happen?
Well, under the Zimbabwean constitution, there are 4 grounds for impeachment. The one is serious misconduct, and the second one is failing to defend and uphold the constitution. And the third one is willful violation of the Constitution. And the fourth one is incapacity of whatever kind. If one or more of these is deemed to have been breached by both houses, that is the Senate and Parliament, then by a simple majority they will pass a resolution to that effect. Then a committee, the Standing Orders Committee, appoints a 9-man panel comprising members from both houses, and they in fact try the issue. They act in an adjudicating authority, even though the Act talks about investigation. At the end of that process, if they determine that there has been a breach or one or more of these provisions, they pass a resolution to that effect, and that is voted on by both houses, the Senate and Parliament, and then a 2/3 majority is required to pass a resolution to impeach. Immediately that resolution is passed, the President is immediately relieved of office.
And who takes over?
The first Vice President would take over. In the absence of the first Vice President, and that would seem to be the case here, since Emerson Mnangagwa was dismissed, the second Vice President would take over. If he is not available for whatever reason, then Cabinet can nominate one of its members as a Vice President to take over the duties of the presidency.
And that person, must they be an MP? Because that I would imagine they have to choose amongst themselves.
No, they have to nominate a member of Cabinet.
Oh, Cabinet, okay. Does the President get an opportunity to defend himself?
It has to be a minister.
Does the President get an opportunity to defend himself?
Yes, although it's not specifically stipulated in the Constitution, there can be no doubt that when the 9-man member or 9-person committee sits to investigate and act in this adjudicating capacity, they would have to accord him procedural fairness. And that means that the trial, and it would be a kind of trial, would have to be conducted in a fair way, giving the President every opportunity to defend himself. That means that this process is likely to take some time.
They are, excuse me, they are hoping that they'll be done in 4 days. Can you see that happening?
I doubt it. I think that, bearing in mind that this adjudication process has to take place, you know what trials are like. Typically, there can be delaying tactics, there can be technicalities raised. So it depends entirely on the President's legal team and whatever strategies and tactics they adopt, because the adjudicating panel has to make sure that they act fairly at every inch of the way. Because if they don't, it'll open the door for a challenge to the Constitutional Court later on the basis of procedural unfairness.
From where you've been sitting and watching, has any constitutional rule or rule of law been crossed at the moment?
Yes. I think, you know, we have a problem here, and it's arguable. I think on the face of it, the actions by the military to, in effect, divest the president of his capacity to act presidentially and confine him to his home has all the, shall I say, the attributes of a coup d'etat. However, Peter, we must never forget that in 2008, the military was, in effect, installed as the de facto government of the country, because they took the stance in breach of the Constitution, in gross breach of the Constitution, that they would not swear allegiance to the then President-elect Morgan Tsvangirai. That was a complete breach of the Constitution. And when the stance was taken by the AU and SADC that they could do that, that in fact constituted a coup, because in terms of Section 1 of the Constitution, any act or conduct that is in breach of the Constitution is invalid. So from that date, 2008, the military have been the de facto rulers of the country. And in terms of the jurisprudential principle of necessity or effectiveness, it could be argued that what has now happened is not jurisprudentially a coup.
All right. Perhaps as a final question, and very briefly, even though it's one question that probably will take quite a while, you were a judge in Zimbabwe.
Yeah.
How difficult was it, perhaps towards the end, to be a judge during the Mugabe era?
I think what we must recognize is that President Robert Mugabe made a very, very good stance, and those first 3 years, his operational mode and culture was very, shall we say, inclusive. And the reason I was appointed as judge was precisely because of my ethnicity. He said that he wanted a judiciary that represented the racial and ethnic diversity of the country, and those were very good years. I think that things went wrong with Gukurawundi. I would give him almost full marks for the period from 1980 to 1983. And eloquent testimony of this is that he appointed none other than Ian Smith's General Peter Walls as our first army commander. So you can see an operational culture and mode there that was exceptional. Things did deteriorate after Gukurawundi, and a stage was reached where the judges' chambers were actually invaded, they were subjected to threats, and also the judiciary was packed with what the executive considered on-site judges.
All right, thank you very much indeed for your insights. We'll have to get you in again, just for a longer conversation, just on your judicial journey back in the day. That was Judge Chris Greenland taking us through the impeachment process, and he says that this is going to take a lot longer than 4 days, Francis.